All right, done deal. I hit record. No editing, one take. Here we go. Another book review, guys. Voddie Baucham? I think it's Voddie Baucham. I don't know much about the man, so I'm not actually even 100% sure how to pronounce his first name. I think it's Voddie. Usually when one gives a book review, they should probably actually know how to pronounce the author's name. And I'm realizing that was an oversight until just now. Anyway, I did make some notes, though. I feel like when I was reading this book, I was already a little emotional because of how much I hate critical race theory. And so let me just preface my thoughts about his book by saying this. It was fantastic. It was fantastic. It was the perfect read for me. It came out on Audible on the 6th. Took me yesterday and today to listen to it. So I actually just finished it like 4 or 5 hours ago. I listened to it both days at work. You don't really know. I've never read a book from Voddie before, so I wasn't really sure if it was going to be super intellectual and hard to follow while I was working. And I found that wasn't the case. It was super easy. It was laid out well. You could follow his train of thought. He made his points. He was very articulate, but also very simple at the same time. Obviously, he's a big black man, so this, I feel like his thought process on this carries a lot of weight, or at least it does with me, because I feel like this day and age, the way things are so messed up, it's like it's okay to speak the truth, but sometimes you're not really sure what kind of environment you're going to be in when you're saying some of these things. You don't know how they're going to be taken. You don't know who's going to start throwing blows, and you don't know who agrees and disagrees. And it's just everything about today is just a nightmare when it comes to the church and critical race theory and intersectionality and theological liberalism and all these weird Marxist things moving in. And, I grew up in the Southern Baptist Church. I'm not in the Southern Baptist Church anymore. Couldn't pay me to be in the Southern Baptist Church these days. But I love the fact that I kind of shared that history with Voddie. So as he kind of gives you the 30,000 foot view of CRT, and more so the big picture of how it's crept into the Southern Baptist Church and those affiliated with the Southern Baptist Church. It's a really sad day and age that this book had to be written, but it had to be written, and I'm very glad that Voddie wrote it, and I'm glad that God used Voddie to write it. He provided a lot of clarity. Something for me as I've studied CRT over the last couple of years, I became convinced that it was really just like it flips the doctrine of justification on its head, right? That, this idea of justification is that, men are born sinful. We've sinned against a holy God. We deserve an eternal punishment, right? And in this process of justification, Jesus imputes his righteousness, and our sin is imputed to him, right? He gets our sin, we get his righteousness, we have peace with God, right? The doctrine of justification is this beautiful thing. I'm not into the whole N.T. Wright, new perspective on Paul stuff, so somebody might have a difference of opinion on that. But as far as I'm concerned, I carry the old school doctrine of justification everywhere I go. But anyway, my point is I look at CRT, it was I could see how, like, with just the fundamental core of the gospel was being challenged with this idea that you could be imputed with a sin that was irredeemable, right? That there was a sin because of your ethnicity that was never forgivable, right? That somehow it was just a stain upon your character, shame on you for having been born white, and all the other nonsense that comes along with CRT and, intersectionality and the rest of all that garbage. Voddie really provided clarity to that. He actually brought up this concept that in this he really refers to this social justice stuff as a cult, and he makes a good case for why he thinks it really is a cult. But he really provided clarity to some of these things that I had been mulling over by saying that this cult has created a new original sin. this new definition for total depravity, which is directly tied to a person's ethnicity. He dove into some of the concepts of Gnosticism, sort of the way these ethnic arguments tend to move towards, those that have knowledge, those that can't have the knowledge, so to speak, and how they really frame this knowledge as if it was something mystical given to you just by the basis of your ethnicity at birth. I really just enjoyed listening to his overview of this problem and his issues when it came to Scripture. It really was a beautiful book. It hit me on a personal level, in that my own church has been going through this lately, and my church is not super large, but it's big enough. I think there's probably 1,000 to 2,000 people that show up over 4 services any given Sunday. But my church is one of those that mandated masks, still mandating masks at one service, shut down worship for a long time, started getting loosey-goosey with the elements with the virtual communion. At one point in time, my pastor even told people you could use pizza crust and orange juice, which, coming from like what used to be a pretty reformed church, these things were just kind of staggering to me. But even before that, there were little buzzwords from the pulpit that you could tell that social justice had crept in, that there was a seed of wokeness in the background of my church's leadership. And I started hearing a lot of Tim Keller quotes, and I heard a lot of Matt Chandler quotes, but I don't follow Tim Keller. I don't follow Matt Chandler, and I don't really have the time to go back or the desire to just listen to their sermons for research. And what Voddie did was he really helped. Like, as I've been listening to the leadership of my own church go woke, Voddie kind of, like, in my church has ties to like Acts 29 and like the Southern Baptist Church, comes out of a Southern Baptist church. And so there are a lot, like I said, this whole group that Voddie's talking about had a direct influence on where I think some of my leaders have gotten their ideas. But he goes back and he pays specific attention to guys like Tim Keller by quoting things from their sermons and interviews or whatever. He talks about Matt Chandler. He brings up David Platt. He brings up, I guess he's a musical artist named Shai Lin. He brings him into the mix. He brings up Mark Deaver and the whole 9 Marks thing. And he tracks the history of some of the Article 9 in the Southern Baptist Convention, the Dallas Statement, and just a lot of good history, right? And so if you're interested in the concept of critical race theory and you're tired of the wokeness that's just moving into the churches, Voddie provides a very contemporary 30,000-foot view of the big picture, the problems with what's taking place and its origin, not only with those outside the church, right? He specifically targets people in Black Lives Matter, and even before that, some of the philosophical stuff that was written leading up to this. Even at one point in time in the book, I think he even goes back as far as the 80s, to talk about one woman in particular that had written a paper about this at a university. So anyway, for me, it was just a really, 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 really good book. And he gives a very good dire warning about, he calls it fault lines, right? Because it's like, what happens? Earthquakes happen on fault lines. Like, this is a fault line in the church that will have there is a looming catastrophe right now if the church does not get a handle on this. And I'm afraid, like, my own church is losing the battle. He didn't really have, that's one thing, he didn't really have a lot of practical advice for how a regular layperson should go about dealing with the wokeness in a church. He didn't give a ton of, I don't think anybody really knows right now, because all of the extenuating circumstances in churches are so different and there's such a wide variety of opinions that it can be very difficult. But he does show how critical race theory can have an effect on lots of other topics. And for instance, like, even in my own church, we have a citywide sanctuary city vote that's coming to ban abortion in my own city, right? And I have actually approached my elders to go ahead and make people aware of this vote and, really stand up for the lives of these unborn babies. And they convened in an elders meeting, and they came up with a list of 4 bullet points, which were complete theologically liberal garbage. I shared them with some of my friends in the church. We looked at, this was the official position of the elders. But what I did notice in particular was one of the main things that they stood on was a Tim Keller quote, which was essentially this idea that the Bible tells us what we should stand for, but doesn't really tell us. I'm just paraphrasing, but the Bible tells us what we should stand for, but doesn't necessarily tell us the best way to go about doing that, and blah, 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 blah. And that really frustrated me personally, because it seems like it's such a cop out, and it's like a trope or something. It's not a good argument. It's a red herring. And the way they framed that, it was really the first time I had to grapple with that personally. And towards the end of this book, Voddie actually specifically targeted that line of thinking. And so for me, I was so riveted to what he had to say in that part, because I really have been desperate for any sort of advice, on how to go about this. But, one thing that I did walk away from this book with in the end, not only did I think it was a fantastic book, right now, what is it? It's April 9th, 2021. Voddie just got out of some sort of quadruple bypass. Nobody really knows what the state of his health is, as far as I know. So be praying for Voddie. But one thing that I walked away with from this book was even more motivation to hold our leadership accountable. And I think that there's never been a time like now for lay people to be educated, to pursue knowledge of these topics deeply, not only with their origin and the current players that are pushing the agenda, but also staying current by bringing these things to the church when the elders are failing to, right? And at least bring them to your elders and your pastor, or being educated enough to notice when these hot topics or these buzzwords are coming from the pulpit, because they really indicate a failure of leadership that holds to a true biblical standard. And it's setting the stage for major failures in the church. And so, like, if nothing else, if you read this book, hopefully it would encourage people to continue to educate themselves and take a bold stand in their church for the truth. Because CRT, critical race theory, and all this other nonsense that comes along with it, it really is an attack on the church, an attack on the gospel. And he makes a great point in this, that there's an atheist author or something out there that can see how this is going to destroy the church and doesn't really seem to care. I don't remember what this guy's name was, but even non-Christians out there just analyzing these things from, a distance can see how this is going to destroy churches that let this in. But yet our own conventions, one of the largest, evangelical conventions in the world, SBC, it is adopting this at a rate that is just frightening, and it's such a major network of churches. It's like, we can't lose that, man. I guess we can. I don't know. I mean, God's got a strange way of doing things sometimes. But anyway, I think it was a great book. I hope a book like this would motivate you. I know it motivated me. And I'm still fighting my own battle in my own church, but that's a story for another day. And very well might end in the near future with me revoking my membership if this continues to go any further. I don't see how I can submit to spiritual leadership that adopts these demonic worldviews. But anyway, good job, Voddie. And man, I hope you recover from your surgery. And I hope anybody watching this goes and gets that book right now, because lay people need to stay educated. And this is a really good book to just get a good overview of the topic, so that you've got some talking points, you got something in your hopper. So when you're at church and this comes up, you can say, look, I can't let this go. We got to talk about this. You can do so lovingly. And Voddie gives some advice in the book for how to do that. Good book. I recommend it to everybody. I don't know how much it costs. It really wasn't that long. Like I said, I listened to it over a period of like 6 or 7 hours over 2 days. It was easy. I might even listen to it again. So guys, thanks for hanging out with me on this edition of just the book review. I don't know. I hope it's helpful, and I hope you enjoy Voddie's book. Peace.